All right. So what we're going to start off today is the topic of corporate governance. Corporate governance starts off with two things: shareholder theory and stakeholder theory. Okay. When you talk about shareholder theory, it's a little older. Stakeholder theory is a little more recent. So I'll just draw a timeline and just say this was recent and this was in the past, right? Under shareholder theory, what companies are born for, why you make companies, are to maximize profit for the shareholders. You're primarily interested only in the profit, so you don't essentially care about the other uh, people revolving around the company. You're just bothered about shareholders, only bothered about shareholders. When you come to stakeholder theory, it becomes slightly more interesting. When I say stakeholder implies that anyone who has a stake must be taken care of. So which means you are not only looking after the shareholders. So under the stakeholder theory, the shareholder is a part of a larger group. So you need to take care of your employees. A company needs to take care of its employees. It needs to take care of the managers. It needs to take care of the environment. And I think recently we can see there has been a huge move towards ESG investing, right? If you keep looking at articles online, there's a push towards ESG investing. And I think even BlackRock recently uh, announced that they would be looking towards building that portfolio to a greater extent. So that's environment, social, and governance. So that is, when you invest in a company, you need to take care of these three aspects, right? So the environment is not a stakeholder, but you need to take care of the environment, right? You can't say environment is a stakeholder, but human beings have a stake over here, right? Like, because you're talking about economics being important, and economics is for the larger good of the society. So when you invest in a particular company, those companies that take care of people, that take care of good governance, good management, and the environment, they should be given more importance under the stakeholder theory. So you have multiple stakeholders. Just to explain this, you have suppliers, you have consumers, right? So a company can't say, hey, you know what, I don't really care about customers. They can go like do whatever they want. I just want my profits. I'll sell products even through poor marketing, even if it's false marketing. I don't care as long as I make money. That's shareholder theory. So earlier, companies were so driven by profit maximization, that capitalism. So you can say that shareholder theory is an outcome of capitalism, right? Right. This is not particularly given in textbooks, but shareholder theory is an outcome of capitalism, because capitalist means that you take care of your interests and automatically the societal interest will be taken care of, which doesn't work all the time, because if you're only looking at profits, at times you ignore the other stakeholders. You don't care about suppliers. For example, if my main motto is to make profits, I won't really care if the supplier is suffering. I'm not paying him, as long as my balance sheet looks good, as long as my income statement looks good. Uh, Another example is what WeWork did. So the founders, what they did, absolutely incorrect, right? You can't really uh, go and inflate your balance sheet, because ultimately the investors or the stakeholders are going to be affected, right? So we'll look at the different stakeholders in detail. So the first stakeholder being the shareholder. Then you have managers, you have employees, and you have the board of directors. By the way, this is any book that you see will start off with this, right? And you don't have to really study um, even though you are preparing for the CFA exam, this doesn't need to be studied from the CFA book or from any book that you're referring to. This is readily available content. It's there online. I'm just compressing it from different sources, right? So shareholders, what do they have? Who are shareholders? They basically have equity. So they have claims, assets minus liabilities. So shareholders, in terms of what they own, they have a residual claim, right? They also have rights, right? Depending on what type of share they own, they have rights. So that is to voting and to other decisions that the firm makes, right? So in essence, shareholders want to increase the value of their shares. So increase value of their shares. Value of shares must increase, right? That's their primary interest, which is kind of obvious. That's why shareholders are even there, right? They want to make money. Board of directors, on the other hand, right? They have two different things. Board of directors. So I'll just bifurcate this within the board of directors. They have a very interesting position because they are at two ends, right? They are like the balance. The board of directors will give a strategy to the firm and managers. Strategy that is firm, and they also need to protect the shareholders. So the board of directors have a dual role. They need to protect the interest of the shareholders and they need to give a long-term strategy to the firm as well, right? Now, what's interesting is this again bifurcates into one tier and two tier BODs. One tier and two tier BOD. So what do these guys have? They need to protect interest. So you can say that they are more like guardians. I often say board of directors are akin to principals. Like in a school, the principal needs to protect the interests of both the parent side on a large scale and the teachers. So there's a conflict between the teachers and the parents. If a student is not performing, parents are obviously going to side primarily with the kid or the teachers, depending on what kind of parent it is. But the principal is like the board of directors. They need to protect the interests of both sides. The teachers are like managers. They need to manage their kids. Whereas parents, on the other hand, they are like shareholders. They want to have their kids to be the best, right? So they want them to get grades. So this is how I initially remembered it. Of course, down the line, you don't really need analogies. This becomes easy to remember. You don't need to think of all those things. But this is how everything that you observe around a corporate structure is sort of born from there itself. Okay, so in a one-tier board structure, what happens is there's just a single board, right? I mean, that's pretty obvious because you have the word one. You just have one structure. Here it is bifurcated. When I say one-tier structure, it implies that both the executive and non-executive board members are on the same board. Here, in a two-tier structure, you will have a management board and a supervisory board, right? So I know it's a little cramped there, but it's a bifurcated structure. So basically, if you're managing the company, you can't be on the supervisor board. It's like saying, I want to monitor my performance, but I'll appoint myself to monitor my own performance. That doesn't make sense, right? The board of directors needs to say, hey, you know what? You're making mistakes. If you're the same person, you can give yourself an A grade. So that doesn't work. Senior managers, what is their interest? What do they get paid in? They get paid bonuses plus salary. So they have a more conservative approach. Right. So because they are going to, and the reason it's conservative is their compensation is based on a salary, right? So they don't want the firm to go bust. So it's based on, it's based on salary, and these bonuses are based on how you perform. That's how you get bonuses, how you perform. So what will their interest be? They want the firm to be financially successful only. Now, the problem is that in general, shareholders are in the long term. Whereas managers, see, if I'm working as a manager in one company, I can quit that company after getting a bonus and move to another company. So in general, managers, if they don't have a long-term vision, they can inflate profits in the short term. That's where the conflict arises. Okay. Then you have employees. Employees also, because they get a salary. So because employees also get a salary, they are interested in stability. So they don't want high risks. Don't want high risks, right? Because employees are concerned with job security. So if you want to work in a firm for a long while, you're interested in the sustenance of that firm. You don't want to lose the job and then get into finding another job, because your individual cash flows will get affected. This is why you have to consider all the shareholders, because if I'm selfish with my company, I can ignore one or more of these partners or stakeholders, as they say. That's why stakeholder theory, I'm a big fan. So even when I design uh, my book or anything that I'm writing, I'm most interested in the customer. Consumer has to be kept at the forefront, because they are the ones who are consuming the product. Everything related to sustenance, salary, profitability always comes from the consumer. So even if you're making anything, for example, I run an educational institute, right? It's in finance. So if I'm teaching finance, I want students to get the best experience, because that's what's going to get me long-term profitability, because it automatically goes around. The word of mouth spreads, your marketing becomes easier. You don't really need to, you can't ignore customers, because if you do that, that only increases value in the short run. You might make a lot of money in the short run, but over 10 years, your firm's going to be a failure, right? The last two partners or stakeholders are, of course, I mentioned consumers, but we won't go at length into discussing about consumers. The two other bits are creditors and suppliers. These are interesting because both these partners, creditors and suppliers, they also require stability, right? They are not interested in short-term profitability. They want an ongoing relationship. And creditors are banks, or any other uh, lenders and suppliers. They're interested in long-term profitability or solvency, because they want continued business, or they want to recover the loans if you're a creditor. So the main interest here for these two parties will be long term, right? And it will be sustained. So I'll just write sustain. Okay. If you have this diagram in mind, it's pretty much covered. You don't really need to know anything else. This page should be more than enough, right? Uh, that's for the first part. Okay, we'll go to the next step, conflicts. Okay. When you talk about conflicts, the primary conflict is between shareholders and managers. Okay. The idea here is that shareholders, what do they want? They want profit maximization, right? They want to increase their profits. This is what they want. What do managers and directors want? They need to think of, your directors need to think of all the stakeholders. They can't just think of the shareholder. And managers, on the other hand, they're interested in, for long-term sustenance, they're interested in lower business risk, right? So managers and directors, because they're interested, or they should be interested in long-term sustenance, unless you're a manager who's just interested in making a quick buck, you're in general interested in lower business risk. Because you're interested in lower business risk, there's always a conflict. Why do shareholders, if I'm a shareholder in a company, the company is a part of my portfolio, right? One company or corporate is a part of my portfolio, correct? It's not my entire portfolio. I'm assuming that my portfolio is going to be diversified. If the portfolio is diversified, then my business risk, I want them to take higher business risk. As a shareholder, I want companies to take on more risks, right? Whereas the company doesn't want to, right? Now, the other problem is managers have more information, right? Managers have more information than shareholders because obviously, if you're involved with the company on a day-to-day basis, you know what is going on within the company, but they don't need to share everything with the shareholders, right? So there's always going to be that information asymmetry as well, right? So these two things, again, you don't need to stick to a particular book to study this. This is available everywhere. Information asymmetry. Yeah, information asymmetry between managers and shareholders. You just have to know this point that managers can always have the upper hand in terms of decisions. Okay. Now shareholders are of multiple types, right? You have, if you just think about it, we have already. So what are the two kinds of shareholders in general? Majority and minority shareholders. Now, a majority shareholders will always have an advantage, right? Because you're a majority shareholder, you can take more decisions because you have greater voting power. So at times there's a conflict because the minority shareholders, for example, if there are 2,000 people owning small percentages of a company and this is 5 people owning a large share, like 60% of the company, obviously they have voting rights, they have a greater say. So this is the problem. Now, the major issue here is related party transaction. This is an obvious conflict, creditors and shareholders. So as spoken on the previous slide, if you just relate it back to this, creditors want lower risk because they want to recover loans, right? Whereas shareholders, what do they want to do? They want greater profits. So these guys want sustenance, whereas these guys want risk. So these two concepts are at odds with itself, right? The greater the risk you take, lower the possible sustenance. I'm not saying that if you take a risk, you're going to shut down the next day, but there's always some sort of a problem there. Like if I want to take more risks and my friends want to take lower risks, there will be a conflict there, right? Because see, even when you run a company, you have two primary focuses. You might be revenue focused, where you're like, you know what, I'll manage the cost. I don't care about my costs that I'm incurring, but I want to make money. So you're more revenue focused. So you start building on revenue base. The other sort of company, which is cost based, they will look at saving costs. And I think those are the companies that, I'm personally someone who is extremely revenue focused with, I would say skew wise, I'm 25% cost focused and 75% revenue focused, because I believe that companies can grow if they focus on customers and revenue rather than cutting down corners everywhere. Oh, okay, let's cut down this person's salary. Let's cut down costs at every possible place. Your focus is not on building a good product. It's on, making profits by cutting down costs. So I feel like that's the major reason a lot of companies don't really grow as well. Okay. Now you have something called stakeholder. The last bit is, I think this is the last important one. So here it's shareholders and other stakeholders. You don't need to really by heart this. It's kind of obvious. Shareholders want to take greater risk, but customers, for example, here on this page, if you see, you have managers, employees, board of directors, creditors, suppliers, all these groups. So I'll just circle this, which I didn't do previously, but this should make it very clear. Just flip back. And all these, this group wants to take greater risk. whereas all the other groups want to take lower risk, right? So obviously there's a conflict between those two. Okay. The next part of the chapter, stakeholder management. Now, what is stakeholder management? It's basically management of stakeholders, right? It's just as the word says, there's nothing complicated about this. But to manage stakeholders, what do you need? You need proper contracts. So if you have employees, managers, board of directors, creditors, you need to enter into proper contracts, right? So infrastructure. So what is legal infrastructure for? If there is a conflict, right? The third one is corporate governance. This is a super important part. It's extremely important as to how you organize your whole company and how different people interact with each other, because one mistake can lead to extremely bad word of mouth and your company is gone. Corporate governance, at least even when I investing in companies with poor corporate governance can diminish returns. If there is one issue, it gets blown out of proportion, right? That's another issue to be considered. So for stakeholder management, the last one is government, right? Governmental infrastructure basically means how you're dealing with the government. That's it. Okay. Apart from, this part of the chapter remains very simple. All you need to remember apart from this is voting rights. When I talk about voting rights, a shareholder has a say on the board composition, right? I mean, this is an extremely important part because without shareholders having votes, companies can do whatever they want, right? Shareholders, they can assign voting rights to other shareholders, right? This is called proxy, right? So if there's another shareholder attending, I can say, you know what, I'm not attending this meeting, you vote for me. So it's very simple. A proxy is uh, if I'm not voting, might as well not lose the vote, give it to someone else to actually vote. Okay. So now here, these are voting rights for board composition, right? Voting rights also extend to, so you can say 1, you can say 2, uh, special resolutions. When you say special, right, for a company, this generally means mergers, acquisitions, right? These are things that board members need to vote on. You can't really go and do whatever you like. So this might require a certain majority. So it can't just be 50% because then there's no point of the other shareholders. If I own 55%, I can only make the decision. So this will be set in the contract that in case of a merger, 3/4 of the people or 68% of the people of all the shareholders need to agree to a merger. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. Now, under voting, the third and last point is majority voting and cumulative voting. What's majority voting? Majority voting, this is very simple. Candidate with most votes wins. This is very simple. Cumulative voting is very interesting. Single board position. Cumulative voting is, I find cumulative voting very interesting because shareholders, so suppose there are 5 board posts, right? 3, 4. Okay. There are elections for 4 posts of the board of directors. Now there are 4 posts. How many votes do I have in general? In general, with majority voting, I have 1 vote and I have to pick one. So from 1, 2, 3, 4, in majority voting, if I'm a shareholder, I can pick 2. Okay, let's say I voted for 2. I have 1 vote per shareholder. This is interesting because if there are 4 positions, one shareholder gets 4 votes into number of shares held. That means if let's say I have 100 shares, if 100 shares, 100 into 4, that would be 400 votes. Otherwise, over here, I have 1 vote per shareholder And that's very, very easy. And depending on the number of shares. Right. So here you have 400 votes, whereas the other side, or in majority voting, you don't have so many you don't have so many votes, right? Here you have 400. Here you get, if 100, you have 100 votes. That's it. You can't go and give 400 votes. This is cumulative voting. I can split these votes however I want. The next